Let's talk about the changes to quarters coverage this year. And I want to go really deep into it. Okay, so I want to go over all of the rules specifically for each player. So, not just kind of the basic stuff that we all know well and good. Receivers running vertical and safeties and corners matching them up the field. We want to talk about underneath zones. We want to talk alignments, leverages, secondary assignments, tertiary assignments, all of that stuff. So we're going to get really, really, really deep into it. So if you're into this stuff, welcome aboard. We're not going to go over things like how does quarters play for trips or bunches or tight or with 4x1 or empty. We're simply just going to talk about the standard doubles, twins, spread 2x2 quarters. That's the main thing usually. The first thing you usually talk about when you talk about quarters. So those other those other formations will be for other videos. For here, we're just talking about 2x2, okay? Because we're going to spend the entire video just going really, really deep into it. Now, I do want to preface this before I get into it by saying quarters, like any other coverage, can be run in many, many different ways. Okay, and we can think about it at two different levels. Number one, quarters itself has many different distinct checks within them, depending on the formation you get and everything like that. And even those checks can be run differently depending on preference of, how you teach it, or even from, situation to situation, things may be a little bit different. So I don't want to say that there's a wrong way or a right way to do things, but what I want to do in this video is highlight the way that EA sets up quarters in this game. Okay, and particularly, so I don't have insight into how they actually want to set it up. So there's a difference between their intention and what's actually in the game, but I'm going to try to deduce that. So given what we have in its current form, what are they likely going for, and what do I think makes sense for the assignments and rules of all the players? So we're going to go over issues with the current approach, even if it were implemented perfectly, because let's face it, every coverage will have its issues, and then like bugs and things that I'm sure that aren't intended. So this is really intended as a way for you to really finally get a deep understanding of how this stuff actually works and should work, and with the hopes as well, perhaps that the fine folks at EA will see this and it will be beneficial to them as well, and in turn all of you guys for this game. Now, the big thing to know this year, there's the usual stuff, is of course as expected. Okay, let's say you have 4 verticals. Those vertical routes are going to get matched by the 4 quarter zones: the cornerback, the 2 safeties, and the other cornerback. And then you have 3 underneath zones to help pass off underneath routes and match wheel routes and vertical routes coming out of the backfield. Okay, so more or less that's the general theme of this coverage. But there are many kind of nuances that come with that. And one of the main kind of distinction points that you have to ask yourself or wonder of how this particular quarters coverage is being implemented is if you are using a more zone match quarters or more of a man match quarters. Okay, and the distinction there isn't really cut and dry, but the general theme of them is that zone match, basically, the receiver in front of you, if he goes vertical or out, basically, I'm going to match him man to man. If he's running something that's not, great for me, like running off of my leverage. So if he's running shallow, or if I'm having inside leverage and they're running outside, I'm passing it off to other zones. And if I'm not matching him, I'm basically dropping to a spot. Okay. So basically I have a chance to match depending on the initial pattern. If I don't match, I'm dropping to the zone. I'm reading the quarterback, I'm breaking on the ball, that kind of thing. Man match is basically you also have an opportunity match right away, but if you don't match, if the receiver in front of you does something different, something that's not conducive to you getting leverage on him and playing good man, you're going to rather than zone off of him, you're going to match a different receiver basically. And basically, if you decide zone match or man match, whatever, they're both fine. But the way that you structure and align your defense is different depending on which way you go. And we won't go into the finer details of which is which. But what I want to say is it seems that EA is going towards more of a man match type of system where you'll see more matching than zone dropping. But I can't say if it's really one or the other, because there are certain players that are more zone matchy and certain players that are more man matchy, and you get this kind of like really deep hybrid that, okay, could be good, could be bad. I'm not saying either way, but what I do want to say is why I wouldn't necessarily pick a man match quarters for this game, especially college. And especially a game that is dominated by Ultimate Team, where you have really athletic, fast quarterbacks that scramble like crazy. And let's think about the pros and cons of running man versus zone, right? Man, you have tighter coverage, potentially. But then you have defenders that have their eyes on receivers rather than eyes on the quarterback, right? And so if you have, defensive backs, linebackers, matching men to the sideline, then there's going to be lanes for the quarterback to run through, basically that type of thing. So that's one aspect. Whereas, zone match, you have more eyes on the quarterback, and naturally you're going to be stronger against scrambling quarterbacks, and even in many cases the run, things like that. And then lastly, it's, I think, like when we think about, why do match coverage, man coverage. If you're better than the offense, man coverage is the best thing you can do. But if you're not, if you're kind of equal, there's only so many receivers you can double, right? And therefore, man really doesn't make sense in terms of actually having the upper hand on the offense, because the offense always has the advantage of being the first mover. In zone coverage, and I talked about this in the last video that I published, but in zone coverage, there's only so much space that you can cover, right, with 7 guys or even 8 guys. And so if your opponent's quarterback is halfway decent, he's going to find all the holes. Match coverage is like smart man to optimize your chance of getting the optimal leverage on the route distribution. Okay, but the downside here is that it requires coordination, and it requires a tight understanding of what each player needs to do and when and how and everything like that. So it's difficult to pick up. And let's face it, match coverage has been in the game for a while, and it's still far from perfect. So I'm surprised that EA went this route, knowing that it's a scrambling quarterback game and knowing that they've had difficulties implementing the match rules. And in my opinion, man match requires kind of a tighter cohesion and kind of a more robust system of rules. But anyway, in any case, they're getting better, I think, in every year. And the better they get every year, the more of these more nuanced things you have to understand about the coverage and pick up and implement into your gameplay. Now, again, I'm not going to be in this video telling you what to do, what's the best coverage when. We'll save that for another time. But for now, it's simply just, telling you what I've kind of come to see and learn about this coverage, and I want to just share that with you guys in this video. So that's the preface there. So I think I've already talked about 10 minutes about basically nothing in particular, but I think it does help. It does set the stage a little bit. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go weak to strong, talking about each player and what they do. So when we think about man match coverage, we think about two sides that are basically independent of each other. Okay, so you think about, okay, this controller is the defense. Okay, so basically on the weak side, you have 2 receivers, and so you're going to have a +1 on that side, and you're going to play 3/2. So you have the corner, the safety, and we'll call this the flat or the apex. And they're basically playing a triangle coverage over those 2. And on the strong side, you have 3 receivers, the 2 receivers and the running back, and you're going to be playing like basically a box over them. Okay, you have the corner, the safety, and the flat, but now you also have the hook as well. So those form kind of the corners of your box. And you'll learn really quickly in this video that it's not simply just, okay, we have 4/3 and 3/2 right here. And we're matching all these routes, and everybody should be covered at all times, basically. But what's really important for you to understand, as you get better at using these types of coverages, is the leverage points and where you're going to gain an advantage as an offense or where you're going to lose an advantage as the defense. And a good way to kind of look at that right away is simply what is the form of your geometry around the offense. Okay, so in this case it's a triangle, but there's different types of triangles. And basically speaking, quarters, the triangle looks something like this. Okay, so just do it really simply. You have a bottom right, a top right, and a top left. And this can give you a hint of where you are weak in this type of coverage. We'll get into that. So obviously probably to the flats. And on the right, although you kind of think of these as box coverages because you have 4 points, I actually think it's better to think of it as like a trapezoid or a rhombus, something like that, where you're not, this flat defender isn't the bottom right of the box, right? You're almost more of a diamond. So you have an inside guy, you have an outside guy with a corner, you have a top of your diamond and the bottom. And then what's more is that usually, the top and the bottom aren't necessarily aligned. One has inside leverage on the slot, one's had outside leverage on the slot. And then likewise with the corner, maybe he's a little bit up versus the middle linebacker who's a little bit down. And so you can think about already, where are you potentially weak? Also to the flat here, and potentially up here in the middle of the field. You could also be weak there, as well as the middle of your geometry. So you're building this geometry around the receivers, but there's space to break beyond and outside of that if you're not, good and solid and programmed properly. But then there's naturally going to be space inside if you can stretch these guys and find ways to break it back inside, type of thing. Okay, so high level, we can think of it that way. At a low level, let's talk about the responsibilities. Okay, let's talk about the weak corner, as I mentioned. So his responsibility, and there's a few different ways that you can play this, but the way that EA has chosen to implement it is basically mod coverage. So man on deep. Okay, so he's got man on number 1 if he does anything past some dimension. Okay, and that dimension is kind of arbitrary. In this case, EA will decide what that is. Coaches in real life will all have a little bit of a different geometry, but you can think of it as a box around the receiver. So I'm going to draw a box with my user Arnold right here. So imagine this 5x5 box or 6x6 box. Not fully around the receiver, but right in front of him. Okay, so imagine this box. So we have 4 different options basically of what this guy is going to do. He's going to run vertical directly out of the box. Okay, that's one option. The other option is immediately to the inside of the box, basically going inside. So he's not passing the vertical mark. Before he passes vertically, he exits the box inside. So that's the second option. The third option, you guessed it, to the flat before he goes vertical. And the fourth, and maybe we won't talk about it too much, is just he stays in the box. Okay, so you're thinking about smoke screens, you're thinking about hitches, things like that. In many cases, you can kind of think of it as, depending on where the receiver is, you can think of it as the same thing as if he's going out. Depending on if it's number 2, you can think of it as different ways. So let's just think about, mostly for this video, the 3 options are vertical, flat, and inside. Okay, so the corner is going to take anything number 1 vertically. If number 1 goes out or inside, he just ignores him. Okay, he forgets about him pretty much. Then what he's going to do, his next assignment, if that doesn't go as the rules state, he's going to basically play man on deep on number 2. So number 1 is not deep, so he's going to start coming in and helping the safety on number 2. So if number 2 were to say run a corner out, this guy would be right there to help match it. Or even if number 2 to run a post or, you know, a streak, he's still going to kind of help there and just be another number on this on the slot. A big purpose of quarters is to make sure that the deep play doesn't happen. And the way that you make sure is that you're, first of all, solid against 4 verticals, that you have a man on man, that there's no gaps, no seams, no hole shots, things like that. But if it's, you know, fewer than 4 verticals, you're doubling up on verticals basically. So you want to limit that stuff, and maybe you're a little bit okay with the underneath stuff. And if neither of those guys are vertical, well, this guy's just going to zone off into his zone, look for things kind of crossing from the other side that he can help on, or, you know, eyes on the quarterback, break on the ball, or maybe if the quarterback's scrambling to his side, he can do that. Okay. Now the obvious issues here, is that if number 1, this receiver, if he goes immediately to the flat, that there's really nobody covering him. So if you have a little speed out right here, you can just throw that out right there. And in this case, I got almost 20 yards. Now, the thought here is that you don't really care because you have the sideline right here. But if the split isn't, you know, these ultra wide Baylor-esque splits where this guy's outside of the numbers, there's actually a little bit of room there. And if you pass lead that in the right way, you can catch that right away, as I showed you. I don't need to show you again, but as I showed you, catch that and turn that upfield. So I would probably personally rather play like a mess man except short. So basically the corner will also play hitches and out routes and things like that. But the problem there is that then he's going to come down on hitches, say on smash combination, like this. And then now the safety is one-on-one trying to battle that corner route type of thing. So you have kind of a give and take right here. And EA chose the mod route, the mod option right here. It's, I would say, not wrong, but it's an interesting choice nonetheless. You also have an issue, and I wouldn't say that, again, these aren't bugs. These are just issues with the way that this coverage were to work, even in an ideal sense, is that the corner is playing with an inside leverage on number 1. So that means even if he were to match number 1, he's going to be out leveraged on corner routes. So in this case, the wide receiver corner route's a little bit strange because he kind of gives up his leverage to kind of go back outside. So it doesn't really matter in this case. But in the case of, say, a comeback, and we're not super close to the sideline where you can think of the sideline as another defender, and the corner is kind of in double coverage basically with the sideline. In this case, you know, you can have enough room if you have enough time in the pocket. And I threw that poorly. You have the ability to throw the comeback route. Now the comeback route is dependent on time in the pocket, right? So there you go. So I had time in the pocket. If you don't, then maybe it doesn't really work out, but you're definitely susceptible there. You're also susceptible to, I showed you 2 plays ago there, the flat defender made a play on the ball, but in some cases, he's not going to be there. So let's go underneath. Let's take the apex away. Let's take the flat defender out of the way. And you see even things like, you know, curls and maybe like a little in route. All of a sudden, you're giving up quite a bit of leverage from that corner. Okay, a lot of this is taken away if you're playing like press man, mag quarters, or mess quarters. But then again, then you kind of leave the safety exposed a little bit. So there's a give and take right there. But so those are some of the issues, even if this were to be programmed completely properly. But there are some kind of bugs and issues with the implementation in its current state. Okay, number 1 is okay, let's do this. This one's not actually a huge deal, but basically and I haven't gotten to the safety yet, but basically the safety, if he doesn't need to match number 2 vertical, he's going to help on number 1 vertical. But the weird thing is that the corner, oh, in this case, is actually fine. I think it might depend on the formation. So in some cases, let me try it on the other side. In some cases, the corner will just totally pass off his route to the safety. Yeah, so you see in this case, I don't know if it's a left-right thing or a strong-weak thing or maybe a field boundary thing. I don't know what exactly it is, but in some cases, the corner is passing off a post route to the safety. And obviously, again, you're getting a situation where you have a deep route and it's a one-on-one rather than double coverage, and you're a little bit more susceptible in that case. Even though the safety has leverage on the corner, on the post route there, it's still, one-on-one, and, the corner, what's he going to do anyway? He's just sitting in no man's land. So it's kind of strange that he does that. So that's one. The other is that, and again, let's see if it actually might be different than when I saw it before. Deep over routes, corners give up leverage really badly on these deep over routes. Okay, so if you look at it here, you see, anyway, in that case, actually wasn't even so bad. But as I mentioned before, the corner should have inside leverage. So anything like posts, deep overs, anything like that should absolutely not be getting free in this case. But what I'm finding is that these are consistently getting open by, you see, that's 3 or 4 yards. Okay, not as bad as I've seen, but still completely unacceptable. Okay, so deep over routes, even post routes in some cases. So let me run this again. Even post routes, they don't get open as much, but I feel like they shouldn't even be able to get a step like they do right here. But in that case, it's nothing really groundbreaking or nothing really game breaking, but nevertheless. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, for Smash, the corner is able to help on corner routes from number 2, but I've also found that in some cases the corner can be too aggressive and lose his leverage. So in this case, it was actually okay. And I think this depends on ratings and everything like that. So every time I change the players, everything changes. So in this case, it was fine. Okay, that's fine. Ignore what I just said. I found in many cases what happens is that the corner will be aggressive and you'll find himself inside of number 2 on the corner route. And so basically then you have 2 defenders with inside leverage, and the number 2 is breaking outside on the corner route. And then you get basically a free receiver for no reason at all. But in this case, I tried both sides and they were good. So basically just ignore everything what I said. Okay, then you have the safety. Okay, so the safety is playing very similar rules to the corner right here. Okay, so he's inside leverage, but rather than number 1, he's on number 2, and he's playing him deep. Okay, he doesn't care if number 2 goes out or if he goes shallow or if he stays there on a bubble or a hitch. He only cares if number 2 is going vertical, and he's got inside leverage on him. He's got inside leverage on him because he wants to protect the post, right? That's your most dangerous possible play right there. And he knows that if it's a corner, first of all, there's certain techniques that he can make to kind of catch up on that play. But if it's a corner route or a deep breaking out route, you do have some support underneath from the flat. Or as long as number 1 isn't vertical, as I just showed you previously, he would have help from the corner route, from the cornerback as well. You do also have the sideline kind of in the mix right there, but that's probably too far to really consider. But you definitely want to cover the inside because you don't know what's happening on this side. Right? These guys could be, dealing with their own thing, right? They have 3 receivers on their own side that they have to deal with, so you can't really rely on that. You have to protect the most direct path to the end zone, which is the post route right in the middle of the field, right? So he has to protect that, and he basically hoping with the route distribution that he'll have help outside either from the flat or this guy right here, or that he can at least make a tackle if it's a corner route. But again, there's certain things that you just have to give up. So that's one thing, and I can show you here. What ends up happening in this game is that the safety still plays it pretty well. And again, it kind of depends on the ratings of everybody. But what I found is that even if you'd have no help from the corner, and even though we have, as you see here, inside leverage from the safety, well, what I find is that in many cases, it's still pretty hard to get that in there. And I don't know why. I think I'm still not used to the passing in this game. I'm doing stupid things with how everything plays out. But you see, he's still able to get pretty good. Okay, in this case, we had a pretty big ratings mismatch between the receiver and the DB there, so I was still able to get it in. But that's kind of as expected, right? You don't have leverage over there, so that's what you're giving up. The other thing that you have to know about this is that if you are, and let's just do it like this, okay? Pretend this is like a flat route, just a speed out from number 2 that we're not matching, and we're saying that this flat defender will match. Okay, so he's going to match him out there. But if we have something shallow coming across underneath, the corner is going to leave that. And so in this case, you have kind of a decision. It's, does the safety slam down on that and cover that across the field? Because, you know, the corner is not leaving him. He's playing mod. And the quarter flat has to, you know, match anything to the flat. So do you do that and, you know, match him across the field and have one less deep zone? Or do you play a little bit more passive and say, let that go in the hopes that I have some underneath zones that aren't doing anything on the other side? And even if not, you know, you'll catch that drag and we'll rally down and get him. So in this case, you know, EA is taking the approach where he's not vertical, so we're not taking him. But the funny thing is how it works out anyway is that, and you know, we'll get into this next about the flat defender's behavior, is that the flat defender ends up taking him across the field. But in any of the case, you know, if you're leaving the flat defender on 2 receivers, one of them is going to be open, right? So in this case, the flat will take the underneath, and then you'll have this guy completely wide open under there. So you're kind of picking your poison right here. Again, this kind of goes back to the triangle concept, right? If you have 2 deep and 1 underneath, you have the ability to flood the zone, essentially. Even though it's, you know, man match, you have 1 guy underneath. And so if you have 2 underneath routes, you know, there's only so much you can do. And these guys are over here playing their own, so you can't necessarily really rely on them. Okay, so I would say this is kind of a bug. And we'll get into that here with the rules of the flat defender or the apex defender. So these guys, again, just to summarize, and I didn't actually finish off right here. This safety, if number 2 doesn't go vertical, basically he goes to number 1 vertical. So as I showed you there, like if number 1 to run a post, you'd have the corner and the safety on him, except in the case where I showed you over here where this guy kind of dropped off the post and then it was 1-on-1. But it should be that they're both on the post to cut off any chance of an explosive play right there. And then if neither 1 or 2 are vertical, as I mentioned, in this case, he's just going to zone off into his inside quarter, looking for other work, maybe on the other side of the field, or, you know, looking at the quarterback's intention and breaking on the ball. Okay, so both of these guys basically, is their man vertical? No, I'll take the other guy vertical, and if not, I'm just zoning off. So those guys' rules are actually pretty simple, to be honest with you. They're quite straightforward. Things get more complicated underneath. Okay, and I wish I would have spent a little bit less time so far, because the underneath stuff is really where things get different and maybe more interesting this year. So basically the rule of the weak side flat defender is that he is man on number 2 except deep. So basically the opposite of the safety. So the safety takes him only deep, and the underneath guy will take him if he's anything else. Okay, so let's go if he's to the flat. So if he's to the flat, he's got him matched up. And again, if he's inside the box, he's going to match him across the field. Okay, so he's got a man-to-man. If he's vertical, as we showed you in many times, he's not going to match him. He's going to pass him off to the safety, but in the meantime, he's going to chuck him. And he's going to chuck the receiver to the outside so that the safety can maintain his inside leverage. And the chuck is important, just to, give the safety an advantage in terms of leverage, but also to kind of delay that route a little bit, especially if you have things like play action where the safety might be biting down. This gives them some time to kind of recover. So as you see right here, he'll chuck him. Oh, okay, that's funny. Always something new. So you'll find that sometimes, usually it should be that he's chucking him to the outside. I don't know why he's doing that, but okay, whatever. So that might be also a bug. But I would say, as long as he gets hands on him, I think that's good. But usually he should be chucking him to the outside. Otherwise, then you're potentially making the safety out leveraged to the post. Okay, so that is the rules of the weak flat. I wanted to mention what he does, but I just can't find it here. Okay, so if number 2 isn't to the flat or inside and he is vertical, then what is the flat defender, the quarter flat, will chuck his man, will chuck number 2, but then what does he do? Remember, this is more of a man match type of thing, so he's likely going to have somebody to man onto. So in this case, let's go number 1 is under. So if number 1 is under, then he's going to match him. Okay? Or even in the case where, number 1 is out, let's say, okay, let's just do it this way. Let's go, number 1 is on a little hitch. So he's going to go match him. Okay? And then if nothing happens, it's basically just running curl to flat. Okay, so these guys are both vertical. He has nothing to do. He's just playing curl to flat. Okay, so he's just basically a zone defender right there. So again, this kind of hybrid, not fully man match, not fully zone match, kind of in between type of thing. So this is actually a lot going on for somebody that is working. Oops, I accidentally forgot that I'm on the wrong controller. This is actually a lot going on for a defender that's really close to the action. And so there's quite a few things to say right here. Okay, there's quite a few things to say. Number 1, we will talk about his leverage. What are the issues right here before we really get to the bugs? So the leverage is usually inside, right? So the leverage is inside for a few different reasons. Number 1, you want to have that leverage so you can chuck the receiver outside. Ideally, I know that's different in this case, a bit of a bug, but you chuck the receiver outside. Number 2, inside leverage, you're playing the run a little bit better. Number 3, you tend to be more okay with routes to the sideline than routes over the middle because they are, further away from the quarterback, a little bit harder to defend type of thing. You have the sideline there, everything like that. But having that inside leverage and the fact that the corner isn't really doing anything, at least in quarters, in palms, you can get some help right there. But the situation here is that if you were to run, say, a speed out, the quarter flat is out leveraged, right? He's out leveraged right here, and you can basically just run this all game long. Okay, in this case, we had a pretty good receiver right there, so we're able to catch that and get 15 yards or so. But even in the worst case, I think you're getting, 5 easy yards each time. And I think if you were to run a zig here, it'd be really bad. So let me run a little zig right here. So you see in this case, yeah, even many more yards. Okay, so you're out leveraged naturally, but that's part of the coverage. That's something you should know. The other thing is that you're also there to help on number 1, but that's pretty far away, right? So if he's running like an out route that I showed you, or if he's running like a curl or a little hitch action, he's pretty far away. He needs to chuck his man first and then get there. And in some cases you can get there, but it still is naturally a lot to ask of one underneath defender to be covering 2 potential underneath routes, or a vertical route that he has to chuck and then get to underneath route type of thing. So naturally there's a lot going on. Naturally there can be some difficulty, and maybe it's a hint kind of going forward that that would be a good player to user, because you as a user got this kind of Superman boost that you can play a little bit better than the CPU, but nevertheless. Okay, so a couple of issues, a couple of bugs with how this is implemented. Number one, as I mentioned, he has inside leverage. So he should be good on inside breaking routes from number two, but in reality, he's not. So in reality, he's just going to get beat. And in this case, the receiver is pretty good, again. But I find, I've tried many different combinations. I find that he almost always gets beat. And even if you do like a really aggressive inside leverage in terms of initial positioning, he kind of gives up that angle. And sure, you have other zones across the field, but those guys could be doing things, right? Like, let me do this. Let me put the back on the flat right here, and then that will give you more space right here. Okay, in that case, I had to lead it in a weird way, but he caught up. But you get that. It's kind of strange that he has inside position, inside leverage, and he's basically getting beat outside. He's not matching vertical, which is fine, but he's also getting beat inside. So again, another kind of hint of maybe this is someone you want to user, because in its current form, this guy doesn't really do a great job at any of his assignments. Okay, so quite rough right there. The other weird thing to me is that he kind of prioritizes number one. So let's say we were to do this type of thing. Let's say we do this type of thing. He's going to prioritize number one. And I'll even do it like this. Number one to the flat. He'll prioritize number one, leaving the guy closest to the quarterback completely wide open. Right? And that's kind of a simple case. Another case, I could do it like this, where I have a little smoke screen from number one and a drag from number two. And we're leaving this guy again like wide open over here. And again, okay, I didn't really preoccupy that flat defender on the other side. But if I did, okay, I don't know. Maybe not the best things to show. But it's strange to me that the flat defender who's relating off of number two is prioritizing the underneath route from number one. So basically, like I said, the flat has number two out or in, and then goes to number one. But what's actually implemented is that he goes to number one out or in, and then to number two if not. So I think it's swapped in terms of his responsibility. But nevertheless, it's a lot to kind of take in, right? Even if, let's go, you get this type of situation where you have two in routes, and you really quickly kind of get overwhelmed. But again, that's kind of a decision on the game design, the game strategy, that these guys will be safe at all costs. They're not covering anything underneath, and we're okay with the underneath sides getting, overloaded, because hopefully the other side is running vertical and we have, other help underneath over here. Okay, that's fine. Let's end this video by talking about the strong side flat defender and the hook defender. So the strong side safety and the strong side corner, we can say they're pretty much identical to the weak side corner and safety. Even though I showed you earlier there was a weird case where that post bug happened on the right side but not on the left side. But in any case, in this case, you no longer have a triangle over 2, but you have this kind of trapezoid rhombus type of thing over 4. And the simplest way I can say the rules here for the hook and the apex are, the apex's rule is pretty much the same, except you have the opportunity to swap 2 and 3 with the hook. So this allows the flat to play routes to the flat more and not have to worry about routes crossing shallow across the field. And so, and although this isn't the case, like default, this guy still lines up inside, but he could, in theory, line up outside of number 2, knowing that he has help inside shallow from the hook and inside deep from the safety. So you can be this type of trapezoid, or in this case, it happens to be like this kind of asymmetrical type of thing where basically all three of these guys have inside leverage on number 2. But anyway, that's just the case. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bug or anything. That's just how the game is designed to going forward. But the idea here is that now if number 2 is to go shallow, the apex will no longer, or the flat will no longer cover him across the field because he has the hook that can do that for him. And so let's say in this case, the back is able to swing outside, then he will take him to the flat and the hook will take the crosser across the field. Now, again, you kind of come into these situations where even though the hook is, really great positioning to cover those types of routes for number 2, you still get these kind of annoying situations where he allows himself to lose leverage on that. And okay, in some cases you can kind of make that tackle and that's fine, but it's still kind of annoying to me because he has great leverage. He should just completely take that out of the play, but in reality, he just doesn't. Let's see how he works on it. I think he does better on slants, to be honest with you. No, he does worse. So you see. Now, again, okay, I mentioned earlier that maybe you want to consider using this guy because he gets out leveraged, but that's also the case that I showed you here. And more naturally, maybe you want to be the middle linebacker. So you as a middle linebacker, your job is basically to cover anything crossing shallow from the strong side. Okay, and so that could be number 2 kind of coming across, or that can be like in this case where number 3 is running this little hitch. Right, so the hitch kind of comes down, and then he will come down and match that a little bit later when the back actually enters that area. So basically that's it. Like the hook is relating to number 3, but if number 3 runs to the flat and number 3 runs to the flat and number 2 runs inside, then him and the flat can kind of switch. But if you get this type of situation where they're both pushing to the flat, you won't really see this, to be honest, too much, but if they're both pushing to the flat, then both the hook and the apex, or the flat, will go to the flat. Okay, so basically the same thing as the weak side, but you just have this added extra little bit. Now, you do have, of course, some issues. I should say, yeah, like if this guy doesn't have anyone to match, like let's say in this case where number 1 and 2 are vertical and number 3 is to the flat, then the hook doesn't really have anything to do. He's simply just playing the hook. So he's just zone dropping right here, eyes on the quarterback, breaking on the ball, chasing the scramble, that type of thing. Now, you do have a few kind of, I would say, relatively large issues with this, and I think a lot of it can be solved just by being a user here, hopefully solved down the road with programming, but just as a good middle linebacker user, you can kind of save a lot of this. Number 1 is, actually before I even get to the bugs, you do also have the issue where this swap between number 3 going out and number 2 going underneath seems to be handled relatively well in terms of the actual logic of it. Now, you did see that the hook would get out leveraged inside from those slants, but you also have this window of opportunity right here to throw that ball in there. And it might be better to do something like this. You also have this little window of opportunity because although the middle linebacker has good leverage on in-breaking routes for number 2, it's still kind of far away. Especially if you're leaving these kind of bad initial alignments where this guy's inexplicably way over here. You do have these kind of windows of opportunity right here, and that could be especially bad, if you trying not to give up a first down or goal line situations or things like that. So that's another thing to really kind of keep into consideration. So you might want to make sure, like say if you're using somebody else, if you're not on this guy, make sure that he has good initial alignment. And, in some cases, if the number 2 and number 1 have really wide splits, that can be really, really tough. In this case, it's not so bad. The number 2 isn't so far out. But, you know, especially maybe if you're, you know, way over here, you know, all of a sudden you have this kind of large window of opportunity right here that your opponent can kind of hit over and over again. So that's another kind of thing to consider. The only really issue with the game at this point is that in many of these formations, the alignment isn't great. So you can kind of fix that a little bit yourself, and then fix the rest of it by just being a really good user, basically. But in terms of bugs, and we'll end it here with the hook. In terms of bugs, you have situations, and I just want to put this back in the middle of the field just to give me a little bit more space. But the linebacker doesn't really. There's no option or there's no consideration for the back swinging the other way. Okay, so basically what's happening here is that the linebacker, the hook, is saying, okay, the quarter flat on the other side will just take that. I don't need to match him to that side. But as we know, you know, this is more, there's more man matching. I don't know what I'm doing here. These flats are more of a man matching type of flat. So if you get this type of situation where we know that the flat is going to cross away on the other side of the field, well, now it doesn't make sense for the hook to be able to just pass this off to him because he's not going to be there. So let's do it in this case. So in this case, quarter flat matches across the field. The hook ignores this in-swinger, and we get a big gain. Okay, so we have an issue there. So again, like if you're going to go man match, you really have to go man match. You have to say, on this side of the field, nobody is crossing to the weak side of the field. So if the back is, even if he starts on that side, on the right side, on the strong side, if he swings to the other side, we have to match him with that hook, because on the other side of things, we've programmed it so the defenders are not allowing anything to cross. So if you have these defenders crossing the field with the receivers, that means there's not necessarily going to be a zone over there, meaning that we have to be robust here and we have to cross with crossing routes, whether they're 1 or 2 or 3. We need to make sure that we're robust, and in many cases with this game, that's just not the case. Lastly, okay, let's do this situation right here. I've mentioned that the game does a pretty good job of handling this switch, and that's fine. But the reason why it does that is that this flat defender will never cover number 2 across the field. He will say the hook will always be there to cover number 2 across the field. But the problem there is that if number 3, the back, isn't swinging out, I mean, in many cases he's swinging out. But let's go like this. If we pass this to the hook and the hook covers him across the field, then who's going to cover the back right here? Right? In the end, the flat defender does come down, and that was a god-awful animation that I got. Let's maybe do, what's the little triple option? This guy. You can get these situations where the quarter flat just kind of expands into his flat before coming down on number 3. Okay, so there's kind of a delay in the logic. The logic kind of ends up being okay, but there's a delay there. But what's even worse is that if we are, let's do this kind of pseudo streak route right here from the back. We're saying in the current programming, the hook will always take number 2 across the field, but then who's going to take number 3 if he's running vertical? Nobody. So there's a touchdown right there. So the way that I would do this is, you know, right now, this strong hook plays quite a bit differently than this strong flat plays quite a bit differently than the weak flat, where the weak flat would play number 2 man-to-man, whether he's out or in. In this case, this guy's only playing him to the flat, and he'll never cover him across the field. The way that I think this should work is that, sure, there could be an opportunity to swap off 2 and number 3. But if it's a situation where, let's say, you know, the back isn't going to the flat, let's say he's kind of coming like this, or what I showed you, and it's not easy to get in this game, but you can definitely get it, where the back is running vertically up the field, we want the hook to be on that, right? Because the hook has leverage on the back, and at the end of the day, so does the flat defender. He has leverage on, I don't know why I can't get back to him. He has leverage on the tight end. So anyway, there's some kind of complicated interactions between all of these guys, but I feel like it can be quite a bit simplified by making these 3, the flat, the corner, and the safety, almost identical to the weak ones, and saying that the hook is basically man-to-man on the running back. So if the running back goes inside on those in-swingers, or if he's vertical or running a little option right or curl, the hook should have him, except in the situation where the back swings flat quickly. And then in that case, because the hook is then out leveraged to the flat, let's say, okay, our help right here is not out leveraged, so let's take him out there and let's take over on the tight end inside in that case. So yeah, that's kind of what I would suggest. Anyway, that's 2x2 quarters in about 1 hour. Next video, we'll go into another aspect of it, whether it's solo or the empty check or the bunch check. I haven't really decided yet, but we're going to go quite a bit deeper into this over the next few videos, and I hope this was a great starting point. See you guys then.